welcome to today's webinar. My name is Paul Adepoju, and I'm the community manager for the ICFJ Global Health Crisis Reporting Forum. The forum has been a response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and since last year, we've been holding webinars that look at key issues that are of relevance to journalists reporting on the pandemic, and that seeks to also improve the careers of individual journalists. And today, our webinar focuses on a very key issue that is important both to journalists and to journalism, which is how to improve freelance journalists' relationship with editors. I do freelance a lot as a journalist myself, and I often have come to realize that being able to have a very good relationship with the editors can actually go a long way in achieving mutual understanding and in even getting stories commissioned to you. So this is why we'll be talking to an expert freelance journalist, Nicole Froio, who is joining us from Rio de Janeiro today on this issue. So allow me to welcome Nicole. Nicole, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you, Paul? Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really happy that you can join us today. And for every participant that is joining us today, if you are joining us on the Zoom platform and you have questions, I will encourage you to start submitting the questions using the Q&A function on the Zoom platform. And if you are watching us live on the Facebook via the Facebook live stream, I do encourage you to also put your questions underneath the video that you are watching, and we are going to get to the questions after Nicole's presentation. So I would like Nicole to start her presentation. She has prepared a presentation that we would like to start with before the interactive session. So I think this time, can you share your screen and take it from here?
Okay, I think so. Can I just go?
Oh, yes.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited to be here and kind of talk about my experience. So, you know, I just want to preface this by saying this is all my experience. You know, something that's really important to know about freelance journalism is that each newsroom is a different world. So this is my personal experience with people who I work with. So, you know, it's not going to be exhaustive, but, you know, I'm excited to kind of share what I've kind of been through and the things that I'm trying to do to kind of improve my own rates and improve my own output. So, yeah, let's get started. So I'm going to kind of introduce myself and talk about, this is like the presentation structure. I'm like a recent graduate, as in like I did like a master's degree and a doctorate recently. So like this is how I've been taught to do presentations. So like that's the presentation structure. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm going to talk about networking and then networking while pitching. And then I'm also going to talk about how to stay in touch with editors, because I feel like that can be a really nerve-wracking process. Depending on how much experience you have, right? And then I'm going to talk about what the top issues that can strain the journalist and editor relationship, and how can a freelancer better anticipate what an editor is looking for. And at the end, I'm going to talk about red flags and money tips. Okay, so that all sounds good. I'm gonna get started. So, you know, you can read my kind of intro. I actually copy pasted it from my website, but I'm gonna kind of talk about my experience a little bit more at length. I am a journalist, a freelance journalist. I've been a freelance journalist for around, I was actually thinking about this morning. I'm gonna have been like a journalist next year for a decade, like a freelance journalist. So that's really exciting to kind of look back and see how much experience I actually do have in this field. But yeah, I'm originally from Brazil. My mom's Colombian, so I usually say I'm Colombian-Brazilian. I speak Portuguese, French, English, obviously, and Spanish. So that can come in quite in handy when I'm covering things in Latin America. I did my journalism degree in Sheffield in the UK, in the United Kingdom. So that's kind of like my educational background. I also have a master's degree in gender studies and a doctorate in philosophy. And throughout these years where I've been kind of building my education, I have always been freelancing. So it's always been kind of something that I've depended on for my income. But another thing that I wanted to say, and this is something that some older writers, when I was starting out, some veteran writers, some veteran journalists said to me when I was starting out is freelancing can be really difficult. It's kind of on your mental health. And I have found that because I do have a lot of anxiety. And one thing that they really recommended to me is to have other income streams. So for example, I sometimes work as a researcher. I've heard of people working as fact checkers, copywriters. I'm a translator, an editor, and a proofreader. And so I take on these projects when, and we'll get into this a little bit later, that helps me deal with a lot of rejection, because dealing with rejection as a freelance journalist is something that's really, really important to keep you going. But yeah, we'll get into that later. But yeah, I've covered things across Brazil. I cover a lot of culture across the United States. I've written for Zora, Bitch Magazine, Harper's Bazaar, The Undefeated. I think that's a ESPN vertical. I've written for The Guardian, the Miami Herald. So I have kind of like a huge variety of bylines across, I've just written something for the Washington Post, The Lily. So I have kind of a lot of relationships with editors, which I think is like why I was invited to do this webinar. And I think that it's really important to share my experience. So I'm really excited to be here. And yeah, so like my main beats are kind of like feminism, culture, pop culture, violence against women, politics, digital cultures, and sometimes I cover books as well. So that's kind of like the main issues that I cover. Okay, so when we're talking about, and I think that the main issue that will be covered in this webinar is how to keep your relationships with editors going, right? And I think that one of the best ways to do that is to make a really, really good impression when you meet them first. Meeting them is kind of like very metaphorical, because what you're doing really is you're emailing them, right? So when you're a freelance journalist, the way to get in touch with editors is you'll find their emails, you pitch them a story. And one thing that has really worked for me, when I was younger, I didn't really used to do this, but I really, really do recommend this. Be very careful about how you introduce yourself. Why do I say this? Because if you make a really good first impression and the editor likes you and likes your work and kind of sees your work and is like, oh, like this writer is really interesting, this reporter is really interesting, I really want to work with them. Even if they don't pick up your pitch at that moment, they might have assignments for you later on, or they might suggest an idea that they had for you right there. So to me, kind of giving off like an impression that I know what I'm doing, that I've covered things like this before, or that, I'm a competent journalist is really important. And that has actually proven to be quite profitable for me in the past. So So my first tip is lead your email with who you are. So what about your experience makes you the person to cover the story? Have you covered this issue before? And I also say that like links are key here. So what I mean by this is that, for example, I'll give you an example of how I introduce myself. Dear editor, I hope this email finds you well. My name is Nicole Froio. I'm a freelance journalist covering the issues of violence against women, feminism, pop culture. And then in each of these issues, I will link to a different story that I've written. And so, the editor can see that I have a range of, that I have range, basically. Like the editor can see that I have range, that I can show you bylines, I can show them bylines that I have worked on before. I have material that the editor can be like, oh, okay, like this person has experience. I can trust this person with this story because they're reliable. So that's kind of like that's literally just the beginning of the email. I think beginning relationships with editors in the right way is really important. For example, I sent an email to an editor a few months back, and I said like, oh, here are some of my recent bylines, like, take a look. And even though he didn't want to commission any of the pitches that I sent him at that moment, he responded and he was like, oh, I just read this piece that you wrote and it was super interesting. Like, I think it's really cool. Would you be interested in working on this piece instead of like the ones that you sent to me? And obviously I was like, of course, that's really exciting. So, I think that that's part of kind of like giving the editor a really good impression, and then also like giving them a jumping off point to know who you are as a writer, know who you are as a freelancer. And if they want to know more about you because of those links, then they'll chat with you and say like, oh, like we're not looking for a story like this right now, but we are looking for a story like this. And like, there's space for you to do this. And we'll pay you this much. So I said like, links are key. They're an easy way to show off. Linking to your previous work. And then also when you're pitching the story, if you've done some kind of pre-reporting or like research about what you want to cover, kind of linking to things that are related to the story. So for example, like previous coverage of, for example, like what if I want to cover, I don't know, like the housing crisis, right? I'll give you an actual example. So I did a story about a year back about prison abolition and sexual violence. So what I did was I actually had kind of researched all the different organizations that I wanted to speak to and previous coverage of kind of prison abolition to do with this kind of issue, which there wasn't that much. So I linked all of that in my pitch. So the editor can see that you have done your kind of pre-work. That kind of sucks because that means that like you have to do a lot of research before your pitch actually gets picked up. But I will say it has been worth it because editors are just like, oh, this person's really interested in this. Like they've already done some of the work. That means that they just need like a home for the story. And I think that's, that kind of shows that you're willing to put in the work as well. And then I put 3 here. If you've interacted on social media before, try to mention it. Editors want to work with familiar faces. This is very true. Like, I know that, most people probably hate Twitter. Twitter is definitely kind of a cesspool of horribleness. But being on there has really paid off for me. I follow all of the editors that I've worked with before or all of the editors that I want to work with. I casually sometimes speak to them on Twitter. So like when there's some kind of discourse on Twitter, I kind of join in. Obviously this is not completely for the like reason of I'm a freelancer and therefore I'm networking. I consider some of these editors my friends or my colleagues. So think of it as if you're kind of in a newsroom and you go get like a cup of coffee and there's an editor like also getting a cup of coffee and you can go chat with them. That can go a long way when you're pitching. You can say like, hey, like we follow each other on Twitter. I saw that you're looking for pitches for this and this and this. And chances are, if they follow you back, that means that they might be interested in working with you. You just have to like go the extra mile and make the contact and just be like, hey, I'm available for work. Like letting people know you're available for work is really important. And then, okay, so we're gonna get started on kind of the how to network, like, and that's the next slide, but like how to network with while you're also pitching, right? So I'm gonna say this like several times because I've been told this by several editors, and editors like complain about this all the time. Your pitch should make clear why the story is a good fit for the publication and, oh, it cut off, and what you can bring to the publication that is unique, right? So you have to know the publication, perhaps read the publication, and actually understand kind of the topics that the publication already covers and what the editor wants, right? And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Okay, so tips for introducing yourself while pitching, right? Because most of the time, as I said, like we'll be like cold pitching an editor. We'll be like, hey, my name is Nicole. I'm a freelance writer. I'm a freelance journalist. I've already covered this and this and this. And I saw that you're looking for pitches, or I have a pitch for you, or I have a pitch that would fit really well with your publication. So make clear why the story is a good fit for the publication and what angle you'll be covering it from. So that requires that you kind of understand what the publication usually publishes. So for example, I do a lot of work for Bitch magazine, and I have done so for years, and that has probably been my most like long relationship with an editor. And I really love working for them. And I think that the way that I've managed to do that is I always understand kind of like what kind of piece they'll be looking for in response to the news cycle, if that makes sense. So, and obviously I think that it's important to note here that like you can't do that with like a million publications, unfortunately, because that would be way too time consuming. Like you would get so anxious to do that. So my advice is pick 3 publications that you really, really, really want to write for, and always read those publications and try to understand how they respond to the news cycle and what kind of things they publish. And then you'll be kind of like halfway into like building a relationship with that editor, because you're treating it as like, oh, I really admire this publication, I really admire this editor. And it'll come through when you're pitching. I think like that definitely comes through when I'm pitching for Bitch, or when I'm pitching for like Harper's Bazaar. And yeah, like obviously like that's a little harder when it comes to like really big names. Like for example, I've never really been published or even given time of day by the New York Times. But like if you pick a few publications to pay attention to and kind of understand like what they want, like I think that editors will see that. And then I also said, yeah, I think I said this before, show the work that you've already done by linking to research you've done and briefly explaining what you already know about the story, or possibly who you're interested in interviewing. This is really important because it kind of shows that you are interested in this topic and that you're treating the topic with respect. So for example, I wrote another piece about kind of like the global like prison abolitionist movement for, I think it was Shadowproof. And basically they asked me to do like, before they even commissioned me, they asked me to do like a lot of research, and they were like, okay, like let me know who you want to interview, like what will be kind of the general angle of the piece, and then we can talk about it. So, you know, that just shows to the editor that you're willing to do the work. And, you know, I think it goes a long way in, as I said, like in the previous slide, like giving a really good impression of, like to giving a really good first impression to the editor that you're trying to network with. And something that okay, so like, and then like be brief, but give a clear picture of your plans for the story. I think that's the hardest part, right? Because sometimes that you want to write, for example, like a cultural story, a culture story is sometimes a lot more complex than the initial pitch that I sent. But the pitch has to be really snappy so that the editors understand what I'm trying to get at. So that is really difficult, but I would say like maybe depending on the story, sometimes it can be a little longer, but I wouldn't write a pitch that's longer than 400 words really. I would usually keep it to 200 to 400 words. And yeah, like try to give a really clear, concise picture of how you will be covering it. And something that I started doing recently and has really paid off is make clear that you're willing to cover the story from another angle. Because sometimes you'll come to an editor and you'll be wrong, essentially. Like you think, oh, this publication wants to cover this from this angle, but actually they want to cover from another angle. That happened recently when I pitched something to Them magazine. It's like a queer magazine by, I think, Condé Nast, if I'm not mistaken. And I pitched them something about digital communities, like digital queer communities. And it didn't really have much of an angle, or it was basically like, oh, I really want to investigate this. And then the editor was just like, oh, like, can you maybe do some research and then like, let me know like what the angle would be. And then, you know, we kind of had a call even, and we talked about the angle that they wanted to do. And we kind of negotiated around that. And it was a really good process. Like I'm really happy with that process. And it shows editors that you're flexible and that you're able to take direction from the editor in publication. And, you know, I think that that's really it's a difficult place to get to, because I feel like when I was starting out, I was really attached to like, no, I want to write this specifically. And sometimes that's not possible. And sometimes you have to trust the editor that they're giving you direction that makes sense. And yeah, I think all of that made sense. And yeah, more questions about this later, I imagine. Okay, and so like so let's say that you pitched a story, you were commissioned, you have delivered a story, and now it has been published, but you really like the process of working with that editor, right? You really want to work with that editor again because, you know, maybe they're a legacy publication, maybe they pay really well. There are a million reasons why you might want to work with the same person again, right? So how do you stay in touch? Because, you know, it's really easy to be like, and don't get me wrong, this happens to me all the time. It's really easy to be like, okay, we finished our work. Okay, goodbye, bye. And then like, you never speak again. Like that still happens to me. So, you know, it's not these ways that I've perfected to keeping in touch, like they're not perfect. So what I've started doing is, this is going to be annoying, but direct communication goes a really, really long way. I think that essentially, once you're done working with an editor that you want to work with again, you have to make clear that you do want to work with them again. Like, don't just say like, okay, bye, thank you so much for like working with me, blah, blah, blah. No, like, I sometimes am very specific. Like, I will say like, hey, thank you so much for commissioning me. I really enjoyed the edits that you gave me, or I really enjoyed that you asked me to write more about this. Thank you so much. I would love to work with you again. And I'm definitely available for assignments. I think it's really important to let everyone know that you're available for assignments, you're available to work with them again, and that's really, and I know that this sounds really simple, but when you're like working as a freelancer by yourself and you're writing all these emails and you're sending all these pitches, it's really difficult to ask for what you want because you're just by yourself. Like, you don't have kind of like a network or a community that will say like, no, like go, like you can ask for more, like it's just like a really isolating type of work, or at least that's what I've found in the past, which kind of loops really well into my next point, which is manage your anxiety around rejection and ghosting. Why do I say this? Because I had a lot of anxiety around rejection. I tended to spiral into like, oh my God, this editor rejected my pitch, but that means that my pitches aren't good. That means that I'm not going to be able to support myself. I'm not going to be able to pay rent. And I'm not going to say like those fears aren't real, because freelancing is a really difficult way to support yourself, especially like with really low paying publications. And, I often feel like I'm doing more work than I'm being paid to do. But, that's the name of the game, unfortunately. So like those fears are real, but they might get in the way, right? Because if you start getting too bogged down by rejection and by editors ghosting you, you're gonna be really insecure, and it's just gonna like get in the way of your output. It's gonna get in the way of how you think of story ideas, or at least that's my experience. When I used to have a lot of anxiety around rejection and ghosting, I used to think like, oh, that means that I'm not meant to make it. Like, I'm not meant to be a freelance journalist. I'm not meant to be a writer. When actually there's a million reasons why an editor might be ghosting you or might have rejected you. I know this is gonna sound really patronizing, but editors are people too. And I know they have like significantly more power than we do, but they have families, they have work, they are probably managing like so many emails. So, my advice in terms of rejection and ghosting, because sometimes you don't even get a rejection, you get nothing, like nobody responds to your pitch. And that's so difficult to deal with. Or like I have dealt with this for years, and it's really, really hard. But you have to understand that it's probably not personal. It's probably not even about your pitch. Like, it's probably, sometimes pitches get rejected because, that editor has already commissioned enough pitches for the month or for the season, or maybe the pitch is a little bit too late. Maybe they already commissioned someone else to do something similar. There are so many reasons why your pitch is getting rejected or why you're getting ghosted. It's really important not to take it personally. And I say this like totally from experience, because once I started being like, you know what, this is my job, I'm going to send bad pitches, I'm going to get rejected, like a lot more started to flow because I wasn't taking everything so personally. And the last tip that I have, no, I think I have another slide. Yeah, I have another slide. Never mind. The last tip I have on this slide If an editor rejects a pitch from you, that doesn't mean that you can't pitch them again. I think that sometimes rejection can be really difficult and you can just be like, oh, fine, I didn't want to work with you either. But that's not the greatest way to think about it. As I said, there are many reasons why a pitch might be rejected. It might not be the right time for that pitch. It might not be something that they can afford to commission at the moment. I'll give you an example. I published a piece for Harper's Bazaar in the beginning of this year. It was about, it was called What Happens When #MeToo Hits the Market. And it was about memoirs about sexual violence. And I had pitched that to several editors over a course of maybe 2 years. Like I had been thinking about the fact that since Me Too started, a lot of memoirs about sexual violence have been published. And, you know, what does that mean? Does that mean that this phenomenon is now commodified, it's now marketized, you know? And I sent this pitch to a lot of people and I kept either getting rejected or ghosted. So I kept that pitch. Like I didn't give up on it. Like I kind of saved it away and I was just like, you know what, the right editor is going to come along. And so someone connected me with the editor at Harper's Bazaar and I sent that pitch to her and she loved it. She was so excited. She immediately commissioned me. And that was like, I don't know, like about a year and a half of me having conceptualized that idea, pitched it to death. Like I really pitched it to everybody. Nobody took it until I found another editor that would take it. So there are many reasons why your pitch might be rejected. Like it doesn't mean that it's not good. You know, it might mean that it doesn't fit with the publication. It might mean that they already have assignments that have gone out, they can't afford it. So the important thing is that you put your ideas out there and that you continue to do so. Because if you don't, then editors are not going to know what you're about. So yeah, like if an editor rejects you, that doesn't mean they don't like you. That doesn't mean they don't like your ideas. It just means that that idea isn't right for that publication in that moment. You might find another home for that story, or you might also find a story that will fit that publication and the editor later on in your relationship, you know? Yeah. Okay, I know I've said this before, but social media is key. I have gotten so many writing assignments from social media. Basically, I just follow a lot of editors, and sometimes editors will tweet like, oh, I'm looking for pitches about this and that. If you have any pitches, just email me. So that can be nerve-wracking and anxiety-inducing because then you're just like, oh my God, I have to think about a pitch right now. But it's a good way to stay in touch. I try to network with them casually on social media whenever possible. And again, I don't do this because I'm just like, oh, this will eventually give me money. But no, like a lot of these editors, I really admire their work. I really admire their work ethic. And I do genuinely want to work with them someday, not just because I need to support myself, but also because, you know, I want to learn from them. And that's really important, I think, that they kind of know that you're there and that you're a familiar face and that you're trying to make it as a writer, especially because sometimes, you know, I'm from Rio de Janeiro, like I'm in Rio de Janeiro right now in Brazil. So networking through social media is the only way that I can actually network, truly. Apart from, you know, I'm in a couple of like cooperative, like writing cooperatives for journalists, but or, you know, I also joined the freelancers union, so that makes me feel a little bit less alone. But yeah, networking on social media has really paid off for me, even though Twitter can be like a cesspool of horribleness, as I said before. Unfortunately, I mean, I think you can be a freelance journalist without being on Twitter. But I will say that it has helped me a lot, especially to kind of like keep in touch with editors. Have a handy list of topics you like to cover so you can inform any editors that asks you for pitches or what areas you'd be keen to cover. So in this way, like when you pitch and if you get rejected or whatever, maybe you can send an email to the editor being like, after they reject you, you can say something like, hey, thanks for letting me know. Not hey, because that's unprofessional, but like, hello, like, thank you for letting me know that you're not going to commission me at this point. I am interested in the following topics, in the following areas. If you ever want coverage in these topics, in these areas, please think of me. I'm available for assignments. So in that way, you kind of like plant a little seed in their brains that like in the future, maybe you can be commissioned to cover the things that you want to cover. And then the next one is about kind of, okay, so what I do personally, and I really recommend that people do this, is I have a big Google Doc with different pitches that I've conceptualized. Even if they are rejected, I keep them because of what I just said about Harper's Bazaar, right? Like that editor loved my pitch, but loads of editors rejected me, loads of them. But I kept a copy of that pitch in my like big like master doc of like pitches, so that when I got around to finding an editor that could possibly like that pitch, I could just like copy paste it. And, you know, just for my records, it's just like, oh, all of these pitches that I wanted to get picked up are right here. So, you know, I think that as journalists, we are really used to kind of like following the news cycle. But it's important to remember that there are publications out there that don't exactly always publish things that are pegged to the news cycle. Some publications are looking for really deep dives into things. And if you have ideas that don't exactly fit with the news cycle, that's okay. Like, don't throw them away because like, I don't know, like you had a pitch about, I don't know, what was happening. I don't want to like, you know, something that was happening in the news cycle or you know, I wrote about like Simone Biles and kind of mental health a few weeks ago. But if that hadn't got picked up, I could maybe use the basis of like, oh, it's very important that we take care of our mental health. So that was like the basis of the op-ed that I wrote. I could pitch that again, depending on another news cycle, if you understand what I mean. Like you can always recycle what you thought previously, just like rejig it a little bit, resend it, or keep it close to your heart until you find the right publication. And then the last tip I have for this is, I'm sorry, I think that there's construction work nearby. I don't know if you can hear that. When you're working with an editor, try to be aware of other stories that might arise from what you're writing about. Did any interesting organizations pop up? Did you identify something that needs investigating? So I'll give you an example. I wrote a piece about mental health apps for this publication called Prism. And I kind of wrote it about mental health apps that specialize in helping like people of color kind of manage their mental health and all that stuff. When I was writing that, I said, oh, you know, there might be another story here about the misdiagnosis of people of color in the area of mental health. And the editor said like, oh, okay, after we finish this, I'll ask my editor-in-chief if she's interested, and then we can work on that. And then after we did finish that story, they got back in touch and they were like, hey, like, we're really interested in this story that you mentioned you might be able to write for us. Why don't you, like, do you want to write it? Like, I'll send you the contract, blah, blah, blah. So, you know, and I did that again while writing this other story that I pitched, the one about misdiagnosis. I found a really interesting organization and I mentioned it to my editor. I'm waiting to hear back from her, but I found a really interesting organization. And I was like, hey, I think it would be interesting to profile this organization. They're doing like really interesting work. Let me know what you think. So that's a really nice way to kind of like segue into another story and keeping in touch with an editor and also making more money. And that has worked really well for me in the past. Hang on, I just want to check what time it is. Have I spoken too much, Paul? Please let me know.
I think how many slides do you still have?
Just 2.
Can you do that in 2-3 minutes?
Yes, I can.
Okay, please do. Thank you.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I should have timed myself. Okay, so I'll be super quick about this. What are the top issues that constrain the journalist-editor relationship? Lack of communication. This sounds like, I don't know, like a mental health webinar now because I keep talking about like clear communication, but clear communication is really, really important. You have to tell your editor, if you're struggling with the directions that they're giving you, talk to them about it. Like, hey, I don't think that I can do this, or well, I don't think that my source said that, so I'm not going to include it. Just be direct. Scope creep. So scope creep is something that I experienced very recently. I pitched something and basically I thought it was going to take like a month to write, and it took me like 4 months. And that's because the editor kept asking for edits and kept asking for more information. And so like, you know, the scope kept getting bigger and bigger. Again, direct communication. Not knowing what the publication and editor need. So when we pitch, we have to make sure our pitches actually fit the publication. Do you know the voice of the publication? Do you know what kind of things they cover? Make sure this comes through to the editor. And this goes back to the advice that I gave you a few slides back, which is follow the editors and the publication that you want to write for. Pick like 2 or 3 and focus on them, on like really knowing what their voice is, and you will avoid this. Because sometimes when you pitch something that's wrong to an editor, they'll be like, oh, like this person doesn't even know the publication that they're pitching to. Like, how dare they, you know? And that can be quite annoying from the editor's perspective. And yeah, some quick tips on how can a freelancer better anticipate what an editor is looking for. Again, read the publications you want to write for. That is why I have such a good relationship with, for example, Bitch Magazine, because I read them a lot. Read the call for pitches very, very closely. Identify where you and your stories fit into the call for pitches. You know, that requires like a lot of reading comprehension. And as I said, pick a few publications to follow on social media. Try to identify how they react to news cycles, try to find out where your timely pitches might come in. Unfortunately, this takes time, it takes dedication because you need to pay attention, you need to focus on these publications, but I do think it will pay off. And I think that's all I have for you, and I'm so sorry that I've run over, but yeah, if anyone has questions, I'm ready to take them.
So thank you, Nicole, and we do appreciate the tips, and I understand the timing issue. So I think we've been allowed to take it a little bit beyond the time allotted. And so before we start with the Q&As, I want you to be able to have a quick brief understanding of our audience. So we are going to do some quick polls and see how the audience responds. So the first question that we'd like to ask is, do you, as a participant on this webinar, consider editors difficult to work with? So let's see how that goes.
If I can, well.
Yeah, you can be talking to this while looking at the results.
Yeah, sorry, I was like looking at them. Okay, I think it really depends on the editor. Like there have been some editors that have been really difficult to work with, and particularly the one that kept asking for more information. But you know, most editors that I work with, honestly, like 80% of them are absolutely super sweet, like so helpful, you know, very willing to give direction, very clear. Obviously there are bad experiences, but I can't say like, oh, like, you know, all of the editors that I work with are difficult. Like, no, like I think most of the editors I work with are actually pretty okay.
I think majority of our participants also agree with you. I think
Yeah.
the editors are okay. Maybe we have editors, more editors than journalists on this webinar, but we'll still take it
they're
like
editors they're editors and editors, like, you know, there are terrible ones and there are great ones. It's fine.
So I'm also curious to know from our participants, okay, and from you too, whether the rejections, how has it been for you since the pandemic began? So like how many pitches have you had rejected since COVID began?
Oh God, so many. Definitely 10 or more, definitely 10 or more, like so many. Like it's just like, you know, okay, like pitching in the beginning of the pandemic was so difficult because things were changing so rapidly, and I didn't know like how to figure out what was happening, but editors were expecting us to figure out what was happening. Up until now, I get commissions from editors that are just like, oh, can you check like what changed with the pandemic? And it's just like, we don't know yet, like especially in terms of culture, right? Because sometimes I write about culture. So yeah, like I would say definitely 10 or more, like so many rejections.
Sorry about that. And so I think several participants who have had several pitches rejected. Now, I want to know the impact of the pandemic on these editor-journalist relationships. So since COVID began, how has relationship with editors been? Has it been the same? Has it been better, or has it been worse?
Honestly, for me, it's been better because I think that um, a lot of things changed for me because I decided to have other income streams so that like I'm not super kind of like worried about my output as a freelancer. And I think that has made things a lot better because before I used to be waiting like, oh my God, this editor hasn't gotten back to me, blah, blah, blah. But now I give myself a little bit more time because I have other income streams. So I'm not thinking like, oh my God, if this editor doesn't respond to me, I can't pay rent. So yeah, like I think it's been better for me, but I don't know how other people feel.
Yeah, I think it's well roughly distributed across the three options, but 35% says it has been the same. 35% says it has also been better, while 30% says it has actually gotten worse. I wish I can get their own side of the story like you did. But we have lots of questions already, and I would like to go straight into them. Okay, I'm just scrolling back up. Okay. So Seka Kayani is asking, what is the topic that most editors like? And did they always give feedback even if they rejected yours?
What's the topic that most editors like?
Yes.
Okay, right now, like what's going on after the pandemic? Like how has the pandemic like changed things, and how, like for the last year and a half, a lot of editors want to hear about like what the new normal is, how people are negotiating the new normal. I cover a lot of culture, so that has been like a prominent thing. It's just like how has culture changed? Has culture changed? What's going to happen? So I think that that can be like a really easy way to get a pitch like picked up. Like I got commissioned to write
Okay.
about. Oh yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. We have a long list of questions. So take this one from Laura Oliver. Thanks for this, Nicole. Do you ever negotiate scope creep or edit runs into your fee? I find especially with a new editor that not knowing how long edits might take can be really challenging when juggling other work.
Yeah.
So what's your response?
Yeah. So I've only experienced this once. And at that point, I didn't really know how to deal with it, but it was like a learning experience. And nowadays I would negotiate scope creep. Like I've been told, like you can say like after maybe 3 edits, you can say something like, hey, edits from now on will be billed hourly, and apparently that can make a difference. But sometimes I'm like too chicken to actually
Have
say
you
that, because I'm, you know
have
what
you
I
tried that
mean?
before? Let's be
I
realistic here. Have you tried
haven't.
that before?
I haven't. But I've been told that's like a way to deal with it. But I personally haven't done that yet. But I really
Okay.
do want to.
I don't know how that will work. I hope when you try that, you will tell us how that went and we'll be able to share
Yeah,
with the participants.
yeah.
So Erin Phil really is asking, okay, first with commendation, this has been motivating. Thank you and fantastic job keeping going and organized. So how do you stay so organized in keeping track of when and what and to who you've pitched to in order to repitch later, if not immediately picked up?
Yeah, that's a good
So,
question.
okay, there's a last aspect of that question too, or just staying organized in general. Do you use a Trello notepad?
Okay. So the way that I organize myself is I have like a lot of anxiety. So organizing myself is really difficult. I actually thought that I had ADHD for a long time. But essentially I use several things to organize myself. I have a spreadsheet of all of the pitches that I've sent and to who I've sent them to. And then when I get commissioned, I also have a different spreadsheet where I keep track of all the things that I have pitched, how much they're paying me, and that's kind of like organized by month. Um,
Wow.
yeah, it's diligent. And then also I also use bullet journaling for daily tasks. So for example, if I've been commissioned and I'm just like, okay, I need to find sources, interview them, transcribe, I put all of them that in like a bullet pointed list of things that I need to do that day or that week. And so like I kind of organize them like, through long term and then short term. And that seems to work really well. And then obviously I do use Google Calendar. That's really
Yeah.
useful as well.
Yeah. Thanks for all those tips. Those are actually, I consider it additional stress on my own, but we'll try as much as we can. We still have, I'm now at the Q&A section. Still lots of questions there. The first question is, was your journalistic work an asset for your PhD application?
Um, I actually would say it was not. I actually, this is like a totally different like conversation to like journalism, but like I didn't
Yeah.
have a great experience in academia. It wasn't great. Like I feel like I think writing as a journalist, because I oversimplify things because that's what we do, right? Like we're supposed to get the idea out there in a very simple term so that in layman terms, right? that actually hindered my writing as an academic, because they were saying like, oh, like this is too simple language, like this is too casual, blah, 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 blah. So I don't know, like personally, I see my journalistic experience as an asset, because I think that I am able to simplify very academic information into very simple terms. But
I
I don't
agree.
know, yeah, like I don't know if like the actual PhD like panel like thought that. um,
When you were sharing the experience of the difference between writing as a journalist and writing for PhD, yeah, is something I can also relate with. This is my thesis, and I've actually been struggling with my editor too, with my supervisor too. She's always complaining that this you don't use a journalistic language, but that's the language you speak daily. So, but like we said, if you can, for that person asking that question, if you can master both languages, very great. So I won't
yeah.
discourage you, still do well with it. So we have another question from Itha Al Azim. Do you recommend working on a story and then pitch the ideas for the media outlet? And if that is the situation, is it better to inform the editor that you go a long way you've gone a long way in the story, because some editors prefer to be partners from the beginning?
I actually don't think that's a bad idea. Like, I think again, like, yeah, some editors do prefer to kind of take a very like, specific direction, specifically like because of publication. But for example, my Harper's Bazaar piece, like I had done so much research and so much groundwork before it actually got picked up. And so in the way that that worked, like by the time that I was commissioned to do it, I already knew exactly what I wanted to write. And the editor, honestly, like I barely got edits for that story. Like, so it really, I think, depends on the editor and the story. I don't know, like I feel like investigative stuff might be worth like actually doing investigation before you pitch, or before you really know like what, you have to know what the story is about before you pitch, essentially. So, I think it depends on the publication, depends on the editor, unfortunately. But some editors are cool with that. Some editors, I've seen journalists say like, oh, I've written this essay about, this pop star and how I feel about them. Like do any editors, like they posted that on Twitter,
Okay.
right? Like, and so yeah, so like and that worked out for them. So it really depends on the editor.
Yeah, okay, so let's go to this question back to scope creep. I think that's something that many journalists are concerned with. So the question is, you talked about scope creep, but how can we tell the difference between annoying requests for edits and meaningful challenges to deepening your work?
I think that does come down to whether your editor respects you and your sources. I've had experiences where, and I think that like I want to speak to like my experience of like race and ethnicity and like nationality here. That when you're from the global south and you're being edited by someone who is American or English, or from the global north, a lot of issues can come up. And I think that it really does come down to respect. Like, is your editor respecting what your sources said? Is he or are they pushing back on things that might make them uncomfortable as Americans or as white Americans or whatever? So I think it comes down to respect, really. If they're kind of curbing a lot of your sources and trying to change what your overall article is trying to say, I would say maybe that's a little bit of a red flag. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Frederica Lavarini, sorry if I didn't get that right, is asking, have you ever decided to leave an editor that you have worked for before?
Yes, I have. Okay, so recently I had an experience where I was working on okay, the context here is I'm a socialist, essentially. So I write a lot about like left-wing movements. And one editor didn't want me to mention unions in a story. And I had to like fight tooth and nail for them to include the word unions and the concept of unions into this piece. And obviously I won't say which it was, I won't say the editor, but I obviously privately, after it was published, I privately decided like, I'm not pitching to that editor anymore. Like, I don't want to work with that editor anymore because we obviously have different values, and that's okay. But like, you're allowed to like keep your energy safe.
Okay, Daud Olatunji would like to know whether you'll be sharing the slide with us.
Oh, I can, yeah, yeah.
So once Nicole shares, I'll also share it with everyone. So which brings me to, I think it's the right time to say this. So if you are not a member of the Facebook group, Facebook forum, I would encourage you to quickly do it. So just go to facebook.com and search for ICFJ Global Health Crisis Reporting Forum. Once she shares the slide with me, I will also share the presentation in the group. So there is this question I think is also relevant. The person did not put the name there, so but it's a very good question. So it goes thus: I find it really hard to take any time off, much other than when I have been an employee. I feel like there is always something I should be pursuing, and like I need to be available. Have you ever struggled with that?
Yes, I struggle with that all the time, really all the time. That is really difficult because when you're not a salaried worker, you feel like if you're not doing anything, you're actually losing money, or at least that's how I feel personally, which is why having other income streams has become so essential for my career as a freelance journalist. I know that this is like very much a privilege. Like, I am a translator on the side. And so, yeah, like I think that having other income streams might help. Or maybe I've heard a lot of freelancers kind of put a price on each of their days. So for example, if they've sold a story for $200 on a day, that means they've made $200 that day. So maybe they can take like the next day off, because then you would have made like $100 each day, if that makes sense. It's really hard to deal with. I won't say that I've solved it, but yeah, having other income streams is actually really important, and actually living somewhere where the rent is like fairly low. I know that's really difficult for people in America because rent in America is ridiculous, but that has also helped me.
Okay, this is a long one, and it's also an important issue that, so I know one editor who gives response only after several reminders at every stage, pitching whether he has approved it or not. Then for publishing story, as he sits over the story after several rounds of edits and will not publish it in time. And then is a big pain in communicating how much amount he thinks I should fill in the invoice for the story. What should be done in such a situation? Should I stop pitching for this publication, which otherwise is a good one and pays good also, but every time it is quite a headache to work with that editor? Please suggest.
That is such an important question. I've had a really similar experience with that. The editor is really unresponsive. However, they're like a really big publication that I love to write for. But I've decided that personally, like for my mental health and for my kind of like managing my stress, I might want to work for publications that pay a little less, but editors are really kind of like respectful of my work and my time. That is a really important thing. So I don't know, another option could be, is there another editor you could be working with? Because it could be also a matter of that editor specifically rather than the actual publication. I don't know if you have that as an option. Sometimes that is an option, sometimes it's not. I think it really goes to, you have to understand yourself enough to know what you prefer. Do you prefer being paid highly and go through the stress of lack of communication? Or do you prefer to work with someone who respects you but pays you a little less? Unfortunately, those are the things that we have to kind of negotiate as freelancers.
I agree with you. Compromises have to be made. So Christina Costa is taking this conversation into cooperation, teamwork, and collaborative working. So how is your experience with collaborative pitches? Have you done any of that?
Yeah, I love doing that. Like that's like my favorite thing to do because well, basically it's less work for you. And then also like I really enjoy have like coming up with ideas together. So my experience with that has been really good. Like I've done a book review with a friend, and I've done a few pieces in Portuguese with my friend Julia. She, we either call each other and we come up with that. We open a Google Doc, we do the research, and then we send the pitches with like copies to each other. And then it's pretty smooth, but it also requires that you really trust the person that you're co-pitching with, right? Like don't pitch with someone that you don't think you can stand to work with, because that would be like a big mistake. But it's been fine. And then like at the end, you just share the fee. I'm always of the mind that the more the better, like the more people the better. So I've had really good experiences with that, and I definitely recommend it.
Okay, so let's go for the last round of questions. Three, but I can still allow one question to sneak in. So if you have a burning question, I suggest you quickly put it down. The first one on my list is, what difference do you see? I think this is from Shalini Gupta. What difference do you see in your pitch rejections when you had fewer bylines during the start of your career? And now, what are your personal tricks to handling them?
Mm. In the beginning of my career, I feel like I I got more rejections, but also like, people didn't then, editors wouldn't then like say, oh, like this is not something that we want right now, but keep pitching. Like now that I am doing, all the groundwork that I mentioned in my presentation of like, oh, here are the things that I've already written, like I'm already established type of thing. Editors have a bit more respect than like rejecting me. I think they're just like, oh, sorry, like not right now, but you can keep pitching. And so like that's been the kind of big difference, I would say. As for avoiding rejection, all of the strategies that I mentioned, like there are to avoid rejection. So like kind of, I have a website. I have a website with all my bylines. I have a portfolio to show. So all that stuff, all that groundwork, even though, you have to pay for your own website or whatever, like all that stuff, like that has really changed the game for me. Because I look professional, I look like a professional writer, the impression comes off. Like whereas when I was a lot younger, people didn't know my name, they didn't know who I was. They clicked on like, I don't know, like an op-ed that I wrote for The Independent, which is fine and like it's a good start, but it's not reported feature and all that stuff. So I think there has been all those strategies that I gave you, they definitely have helped.
Okay, I would have contributed, but we are running out of time. The next important question is, do you send one pitch at the same time to different editors to save time?
Yeah, I do. I know that like there's debate around that and like editors don't like that, but like I'm trying to make a living and I'm not gonna wait. Like editors are salaried and we are not salaried. So sometimes you do have to break these rules. I don't think that this is a set rule. I do mass pitch. I mass pitch and like, I'm not ashamed of that. I think it has worked for me in the past. Sometimes when I mass pitch, like I actually got two of them picked up and then the editor's like, oh, but I want you to look at this from this angle. And oh, but I want it to look like this from this angle. So like two different editors want me to look at it from different angles. So that has actually worked out really well.
Yeah, I do that a lot too. I still did it 2 days ago, and yeah. So I agree, but there is a trick to it. If you want to do it, make sure it's a story that you can still be able to write from different perspectives. I think every
Yeah.
story should have that functionality too. Yeah.
And also, I do want to say that when you're mass pitching, don't send the same exact email to every editor. Like
Yeah, you're right.
kind of like change it a little bit and be like, oh, I think this is why it would be great for your publication, you know, so they don't like catch on.
So be
So
also
yeah.
be prepared that the both editors might actually pick it up. So you should be able to have those different angles on your own. So the second to last question, what do you do when editors communicate only via email, never to phone you or answer your proposal to hear in person? Thank you.
So that's really common. Most editors that I speak to, I have never spoken to them on the phone. Only recently have I gotten a little bit more kind of like, you know, actually speaking to them on Zoom or on the phone or whatever. I like it's nerve wracking. I will say that, like, because you're just like like let's say you file a story and then you're like waiting for the edits and you're just like, oh my god, like did they hate it? Did they hate it? Did they hate it? So I totally understand like the anxiety around that. Um, but honestly, what has helped is me being like, editors are people, they have lives, like, you know, they'll get to my email when they get to my email. Just try to be chill about it. But I know that it's difficult because a lot of people like to have that actual like face to face or like, you know, voice to voice like relationship. Um, but sometimes like people just don't have the time or don't want to do that. So I guess that's something that you just have to try to manage.
Yeah, I think, okay, this is the last question. Have you ever tried to ask your editor to write a reference letter for you?
I have not. I haven't. But I have been offered like a reference letter before from an editor that I've been working with for like years because she was leaving the publication and she was like, oh, like if you ever want a reference letter, just like let me know and I'll write you one. So I think that can come from a relationship that we've had for a really long time. And I think that also like people are happy to write reference letters. I've been asked to write reference letters before and it's complete, like it's easy. It's like, I think that people are like honored that you want their kind of like, you know, approval, if that makes sense. So I don't know, like if you are debating whether to ask an editor that you have a relationship with for a reference letter, I would say just go for it. Like what can you lose? Like you already don't have a reference letter right now. You might get out of it with a reference letter.
Yeah, I said that was the last question, but a very good question also came in. So while
Okay.
before I read that question, there is also an exercise or information that I would like our participants to also contribute. So we are trying to improve our offerings in this webinar. So what is the most important issue on your mind? What key issue do you think you would need assistance on? Maybe it can be something that we can organize a webinar around. So what is the top concern that you are having as a journalist, and what suggestions do you have for us so that we can produce a webinar around that issue? So you can put that in the chat button so that we can know what you consider top priorities. So as you do that, let me ask Nicole this question. Is there any great way of communicating with the editor to raise your fee when there is no fixed fee? And yeah,
Uh,
so that's the last question.
that's a really important question, especially because I think that we're, as freelancers, we're often told like, get paid what you're worth and blah, 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 blah. So like, honestly, like there's no easy way to do it. I got commissioned a few weeks ago to write something and I asked for a larger fee and they took a couple of days to get back to me and they raised my fee a little bit. So again, I know this is going to sound annoying, but direct communication. Um, Direct communication is really, really important. Making clear, like, a lot of editors, a lot of freelancers have told me before that what they do is like they make clear like, oh, I will write these many words and give you this many edits for this fee. So, you know, and also understand that like a lot of editors are willing to talk this out. You know, they're not going to get angry because you're asking for a larger fee. And yeah, just kind of, you know, in my experience, I just kind of went for it. You know, when the fee was too low, I was just like, can we raise that a little bit? And sometimes it paid off, sometimes it didn't pay off. And, you know, that's just, you win some, you lose some.
Yeah, talking about raising fees, something that I also struggle. I don't know how to start a
Yeah,
conversation.
it's so hard. It's so
I just,
hard.
yeah, but regarding money, what do you think? How much do you think is fair enough? How do you? Because there are some journalists. We're always talking about raising fee, asking for more.
Mm,
But how do you decide what is enough for the story, for a particular story?
yeah. Um, so I have decided that I'm never going to do any work for less than $200. So that has been like my uh, goal, that every time that I am pitching a story, I will get at least $200, $300 out of that. So that has worked really well for me. And the way that I come up with that is that, you know, it's a significant portion of my rent. So for example, if I do 2 or 3 stories a month that are around $300, I'll be able to pay my rent. So my advice is figure out how much your living costs are, figure out how much you need to live, and then work back to figure out how much you need from each story that you're writing. That's how I've done it. That's been working for me. Some writers get to a point in their careers where they're just like, I'm not going to write for anything less than $500. You know, so I guess it just depends on like what stage of your career you are, but like thinking about living costs has really helped.
Yes, so thank you for those great tips, and thank you to all our participants too for your suggestion um, on these topics that you think are very crucial. Because we had lots of questions, there was an important
Yeah.
question that I had in my mind for you, and so I think you can close out with that one. When you look at especially Twitter, when we usually see journalists that do complain that they pitched a story to an editor and it was given to somebody else on their team. Looking at this particular issue, I know the pitch is still there. You can still pitch it elsewhere. Uh, do you think is proper to raise that kind of issue with the editor? We've been seeing some conflicting suggestions. What's your take on this?
Can you uh wait, can you repeat it? I didn't really understand the question. Sorry.
Okay, the question is this. When you pitch a story to an editor and you now see that another writer has was commissioned to do that story,
Mm.
you will go to Twitter, you see journalists ranting. Do you think is right? Can you take it up with that editor? Or if you're in that particular position, what are you going to do?
It's really hard because I do think that like sometimes we do have the same ideas. So like how can you really tell that like something like a pitch or an idea was stolen from you? I would only approach the editor and tell them like, hey, like you stole my story or like you stole my idea if I was like 150% sure that that was actually the case. Because actually, I think that there aren't that many original ideas anymore. Like we're just kind of like rewriting like loads of things that have already been like reported on and all that stuff. Especially when it comes to like culture writing, which is most of what I do. So, you know, like I think, you know, there will be similar ideas everywhere. And so I would only approach the editor if I was like like, I don't know, like a 1,000,000% sure that like, oh my God, like you stole my pitch.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
also, and I will say this as well. If that does happen, I do recommend you join a freelancers union. There are a couple out there that you can find.
Yes or no question. Should early career journalists take several fellowships at the same time?
Mm, yeah, why not? If they're not conflicting, I don't see the problem.
Yes, so thank you, everyone. Thank you, Nicole, for being amazing, for being resourceful, for being able to
Thank you for
answer
having me.
all the questions that our participants had for you. And I also want to thank every participant on this webinar. And so please be part of our community. If you would like to know more about the ICFJ Global Health Crisis Reporting Forum, I encourage you to visit www.icfj.org. And like I said earlier, be part of our Facebook forum. Go to Facebook and search for ICFJ Global Health Crisis Reporting Forum and be part of what we do. And we also have resources that are frequently shared via the IJNet, International Journalist Network platform. So please visit www.ijnet.org for resources for your work as a journalist.